gentlemen, thanks very much for coming. It's awfully kind of you. I try not to drivel on and bore you to death, because I've always held the view that if you can't say what you really want to say within 10 minutes, don't shut up and go away and write a book about it, which is what I've done again. This is another Porsche book I've written. It's 38 or something like that, but who's counting? I hope you all had a chance to look at the fantastic Group B 959 rally car downstairs. Those people who are responsible for getting it here, thanks very much, because it's absolutely fantastic. I don't know how you did it. I'm told that the revolving doors outside move out and you can pull it in and God knows what, but it looks absolutely fantastic. A few words about that particular car. It was made in the 1980s. Porsche's involvement in international rallying has been sporadic over many, many years. They never got involved in the 50s at all as a factory effort. Well, not very much, anyhow. But the 959 was an attempt by Porsche to show what could be done technically with a car, and the 959 and 961 Le Mans spin-off still remains probably one of the most technically advanced cars in the world. That one, as Stephen and others have just pointed out, is a bit of a swizz because it hasn't got any turbochargers on it. Porsche didn't think 450 brake horsepower was actually necessary for driving across the Sahara Desert. So they got rid of them, and so that car's a normally aspirated car down there, and it developed 250 brake horsepower, and they made a few of them in competition form, and they competed on the Paris-Dakar rally and the Rally of the Pharaohs and so on and so forth. And just as an aside, in the 80s, when the man that I regard as the finest driver in the world ever, bar none, Jackie Hicks, who, as you know, won them all 6 occasions and won just about everything else that was worth winning, was dragged out of retirement by Porsche, against his will, really, and was asked to drive on the Paris-Dakar with one of those cars downstairs. And he did, and he approached the finish line. He was winning the rally in first place, but politics dictated that the local driver had to win if possible, so Hicks pulled up 200 yards from the finish and let his teammate overtake him and win, so that Jackie Hicks finished second. So it was another thing that Hicks could have won, should have won, but didn't. Anyhow, that's the 959. It was the last rally car that Porsche produced. And they haven't made one since, and as far as I know, they haven't got any plans to re-enter rallying at all, unless any of you know differently. I was at Zuffenhausen back in mid-September, and people there then told me that Porsche at the moment have no plans whatever to go into international rallying or international sports car racing, because they are making so much money selling so many cars that they really don't need to. Which I think is a huge shame, because I go to Le Mans every year. I love the place, and to watch an Audi with a diesel engine winning just ain't. What is that about? I mean, I don't know whether you guys have seen these Audis, but you have, yeah. And what horrifies me about watching them, particularly at night going into the S's, is that if you take a 3.6-litre standard Porsche 911 and drive it flat out, it's fast. It's a fast motor car by any standards, but it's a standard road car. Then you soup it up and compete at Le Mans. It's super fast. It's terrifying if you're sitting in the passenger seat. Now, I'm one of those people that likes to be in control, and anything over 40 miles an hour I get really quite frightened. And then you see these 911 GTRs going around Le Mans in last place, and the Audis are lapping them every 4 to 5 laps. I mean, what the hell are the drivers in the Audis going through? And then what really cheeses you off more than anything else is that you learn they're putting diesel into the damn things. What? I don't know. And you can't hear them. There's no noise from the engine. You're quite right. And as they come past, you can hear the air whooshing over the bodywork, and occasionally a sort of whine from the brakes. Do they ever put the brakes on? I don't know. They seem to go around the corners faster and faster and faster. And in my experience of diesel engines was, on my family farm, driving Fords and Majors when I was 10, and they were terrible things, and they still are. They're absolutely awful. This technology is just utterly amazing to me, and I guess that Porsche will have to do an awful lot of work if they ever want to come back to Le Mans. They have an LMP2 car, which we haven't yet seen at Le Mans. And I haven't got to the bottom of this story, but I'm told that because the ex-company, Volkswagen Audi, had input into the Porsche Cayenne big time, they had an agreement to prevent Porsche competing against the Audis at Le Mans, so Porsche had to withdraw its LMP2 car, which has had some success in the States. It's as ugly as sin. I hate looking at it, but it's incredibly fast and typically efficient, and typical of Porsche. They produce a wonderful thing. That's all by the by. It started with the 959 downstairs. Zuffenhausen, where they produce cars. Factory, I don't know whether any of you have been there, but it's a fascinating place for me. I've been there many times. And when you go to Zuffenhausen, it hits me straight away at the factory that everything seems to be so quiet that it doesn't look as though there are people here making cars. And I took some friends with me back in September. They're not particularly interested in cars or Porsches, but they couldn't believe that this was a factory making cars. Because everything's so quiet, there seems to be very little activity. Inside the factory, of course, there's a whole load of activity going on, but it's a nice place to be in a sleepy suburb of Zuffenhausen. And if you go back to 1948, you take Jaguar, Ferrari, Aston Martin, and Porsche, before big sports car companies really started manufacturing cars in 48, all at the same time, more or less. And Porsche is the only one that's remained wholly independent. All the others regrettably have been taken over, and Aston Martin had very, very sad times. And one wonders why sometimes, and people have different views on how you should run a company. There have been disasters at Aston Martin and Jaguar over the years, which I think is just such a huge pity. And if I may just draw reference to 1931, when Professor Porsche and Ferry Porsche travelled to the German Grand Prix, and of course this was 2 years after the Wall Street crash. Money was very, very tight. Germany was in a bit of a mess. Porsches, as a family, were quite well off, although Porsche started his company in 1931, of course, and orders were not coming in, so things weren't so good. And the old man, despite having become one of Europe's most famous engineers, and reasonably well off, travelled to the Nürburgring with his son, watched the Grand Prix, and they stayed in a tent overnight, which is pretty extraordinary, really. Compare that with a company which shall be nameless, well-known British sports car manufacturer. It's selling cars. It's doing reasonably well, but in some ways it's ailing. Yet there are people who are responsible for that company still riding around in helicopters, which takes up one hell of a lot of profit. You've got to sell a lot of motor cars if you're going to ride around in a helicopter all day long. And the possibility of relocating that company overseas to the Far East, to me, is just a no-no. This is a quintessential British sports car manufacturer, and if they cannot make things in Taiwan, it isn't right. Talking of which, Ferry Porsche said many years ago that the biggest problem that the company faced was the growing wages bill, and in the year 2000, for example, the